joining us for Bits and Atoms. This is a topic that the idea of dropping computers inside of built environments is something that's been around for a while. Certainly with several people here on the panel. Going back to 2000, there was a period of time of doing these kinds of activities. But back in 2000, the sensors and the devices were pretty unreliable. They were very expensive. They required users to do movements that were kind of awkward, and they just weren't very intuitive. And then you fast forward to about 3 or 4 years ago, and thank you. Fast forward about 3 or 4 years ago, and suddenly Moore's Law applies to all of those things. It's gotten cheaper, it's gotten more intuitive, they've gotten easier to use, they've gotten smaller, and the 4 panelists that we have here have started to take something that really 13 years ago was a novelty, and now is becoming something of an art form in its own form unto itself. And so what we have today are 4 practitioners who are doing some amazing work in this space, and wanted to talk about how you define creativity in this space, how you find talent in this space, managing clients, and some of the challenges involved in doing that in about 40 minutes. So we'll get right to it. What I'd like to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll show a video that shows their work and let that speak for them. So Gideon, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Kip. I'm Gideon D'Arcangelo. I'm the head of creative strategy at ESI Design. We're a New York-based firm, about 50 designers, very interdisciplinary, and our specialty is integrating the digital environment and the physical environment, so equal parts physical design and digital design.
Okay, and now we'll show your video. We'll try this, do it this way, let your work speak.
There's a common perception that there's a digital media world and a physical world, and they're somehow separate. We work to integrate those worlds together through our design practice and have everyone now feel and see and understand this digital world and the physical world as one. We do that by adding a dimension to the physical space. That dimension, I think of as storytelling. We think about what's the right scale for that story of the space. It can be on mobile devices, it can be on screens, it can be on really large-scale media displays that are integrated into a space.
Every project that we take on at ESI has its own unique design challenges, and we rarely end up using off-the-shelf technologies because those are made specifically for a home environment or a commercial environment with a really defined use. Working with the design team from the very beginning allows content and design to inform the technological choices, but also allows the technology to inform the design choices.
We like designs that are an actual architectural element in the space. They may flow inside to outside, up and down, or potentially go around the space. From a visual content perspective, we like to play with and against the environment. When designing content, we think about the multiple angles, the multiple times a day, how people are moving in space, and how the media works with traffic.
The end result of this work is that it raises the value of the property in many ways. It raises the value of the experience of the people who visit, and it creates a stronger sense of place.
Okay. So, Kat, while the music winds down, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure.
And we'll get
My
yours?
name is Katherine Patterson. I'm the head of the DIG team, the Digital Integrated Group at McCann in New York. And here in the audience are Jeff Ginta and Jill Tolota, my executive producers who work with us. All of the work that we do focuses on taking creative ideas and building out experiences or integrated hybrid sites involving content and technology and usually some type of community or social angle. So we worked on a Trailview program a couple years ago. We're working on making waterfalls talk. Building rainbows and moving them in roadshow kind of environments. For us, everything is theater, experimental theater, and we look at this type of hybrid integrated build as an opportunity to take a brand and to create a narrative, to create a piece of sort of theater performance for the community and for the audience.
Okay. And speaking of talking waterfalls. Matt.
I'm Matt Powell. I run the Creative Technology Unit at Kirschenbaum Bond Senecal in New York.
And Carolina.
I'm Carolina Sabeka, and I'm an artist, a director, and I work on a lot of both sort of independent art projects and commercial projects that are sort of, and everything else in between that falls sort of on this blurry edge that's now between art and design and art and commercial work that uses, technology in innovative ways and looks at human behavior.
Great, thank you guys. So Gideon and Carolina, I want to start with you two. Both of you come out of creative backgrounds and you have some training in, I don't know, pre-digital arts or art forms that have existed for a long enough period of time to have real foundations. So, writers begin with an empty pad, painters begin with an empty canvas, sculptors begin with an empty block. looking at this kind of work, where do you start to find ideas? Because it's really, really wide open. You have so many more choices. So like, where do you start to look, Carolina, for ideas when you get briefed on something? Like, how do you even get that started?
I think that's a good question. I don't think there is one prescriptive answer to it, but I think I always look for sort of engagement. You know, how to create something that has immediacy and intimacy in the experience that's being built. I mean, I'm always looking to build a situation that the viewer can enter and is part of sort of the dynamic of all the elements that are there. And for me, I mean, most interesting and most effective aspect of these projects is usually interaction. So to create a behavior that lets you look at things in a different way is probably, comes into considering where to start the project in a lot of the ways. But I think every project is different, and it's really, especially in this field, like there's so many things that that are related either to the site that you're working with, to the particular concept, the background, the sort of the information that you're given about what it is that you're working with.
I would say my thoughts about that resonate with Carolina's as well, in that we think about engagement as the goal of everything we do, really. It's a hard thing to get nowadays to achieve. And I think the way in, for me, is to think about the people coming to the experience first, and always take their point of view versus the thing that we're making looking out. Because that never seems to work. So if we use that, if we really spend some time thinking about who's coming, what's in their nervous system before they get there, what's the anticipation and the expectation, then and then consider the context where it is. So everything happens in a place. There's no placelessness. So you have to design both the place and then the thing within the place. So I think then that starts to, if you're really thinking about the engagement experience from the point of view of someone coming, then you have some kind of baseline to see if it's good what you're making. And then you then you work back, and eventually you may need to employ some kind of technology or some kind of new materiality, but it's not driven by the technology or the material, it's coming from the engagement experience.
Okay. And then for Matt and Katherine, Matt, I want to steal a phrase that you used. Matt said that his clients once described him as nerd poets. Is that what it was?
One client, one time. It was
you should have let it stand.
Nice.
Anyway. But I think it's an interesting thing for you two, because in addition to owning part of the creative vision, you also have to own the fusion of design technology. You have to own the business side of it to make it work for your agencies. And you also have to be kind of the reality principle. Not to say you guys don't come up with realistic, viable ideas, but so when you're in that space, how do you identify your role in terms of that? Because it's not just get it done. There's a mix of creativity and technology and reality in that. So Matt, how is it that you're a nerd poet?
I mean, I think in truth we're still figuring it out. It's hard, because the briefs come in a weirder way. A lot of times the brief that we get is do something cool in a physical space, which is a fun problem, but it's a little wide open. And so I think what we've been trying to figure out is what old processes work to help us get to the right answer so that the box gets small enough, and then what new processes have to get built. And I think it's so a lot of it's just been figuring out how to work with brand strategy and planning, for example, to figure out what are insights that are relevant about the audience, sort of the same thing Gideon said. What are people coming to the thing with? And then what are we trying to get done from a business perspective that relates to that? And then something simple that sits in between. I think staying simple is probably the other thing that gets really hard. I get these write-ups from the team that are like 4 pages long about what the idea is, and I'm like, if the idea doesn't have a name that's hooky, that makes sense, that you get right away, then it probably is too hard to understand to do. It's like that, you get a talking waterfall, right? That makes sense, and then you can build out from there.
Okay.
Agreed.
Oh, that's for you too.
Oh, same question. So we try to subvert the concept from traditional channels into interpretive channels. And in order to do that, historically the way we've experienced it is that everything is a foxhole, right? We take one foxhole at a time, but we need to understand the long view of the brand, like what its position is in the market. So there's a business question around it. Then the tactical, right, immediate question in terms of putting aside, we use the example of General Mills Trailview, right? We have to distill it down to what is the core principle, the creative principle, because we don't care about selling granola bars, we care about the essential kind of transaction. So if that transaction is enjoy nature, right, it allows us to say from an integrative, interactive point of view, how do we get people to enjoy nature, right? We send them into the parks with 360 technology. We build a Bucky Dome and bring the parks to the people. We look at doing all kinds of tactical things around a very sort of distilled principle. And so mostly our work is around getting really down to this like elemental baseline, and then doing a lot of exploratory, like you were talking, around if this is the creative, here are like 1,000 expressions of it. And of those, which ones are relevant, right? Pick the first 3 and then sell one to the client. So it's usually like a funnel, right? The big idea, and then the 10th, the 100 tactical executions of it, the 5 we really love that we think are relevant in terms of solving a business problem, being creatively appropriate, talking to the audience, you know, the interactive piece, and then the legwork of like making the client feel like it's a worthy endeavor. So the business piece for us too is also making it a real business proposition. Give us $500,000, it's not just a one-off. You're going to make an investment against an idea that we're going to iterate for a number of years as a program. So
because it's coming out of a marketing budget, there's an expectation of return and a comparative reality to other media economics, and so you have to answer for that.
Yep.
So internally, all of you sort of mentioned some level of either getting to engagement or some sort of meaningful interaction that makes an idea worth doing. So maybe try and respond, if this makes sense as a question, to the difference between the novel use of a technology, which I think our industry is pretty susceptible to because we're always chasing the new, and how you get to something that's a meaningful interaction. So for example, Kat, I mean, just seeing people talking into the ball is a very intimate thing, as Carolina was talking about. But when you're evaluating ideas early, how do you differentiate between just novelty, gratuitous, yes, I waved my arm, it did something, versus this would actually be meaningful?
We suffer a lot in the execution of our work. And in that sense, for example, the orb was never part of the original creative brief. And it resulted in a catastrophe on set in the 11th hour, where we realized that like the deafening noise of the water dropping was going to make it impossible for us to mic the audience and have an actor embedded somewhere. Like the logistics on the ground were like a huge disaster. So we literally, this was like necessity is the mother of invention, and after standing and freaking out for a while, we realized that the kind of model of the Oracle of Delphi of like petitioning and like having this sort of constellation point, it literally presented itself as a result of a crisis. So I think you have to, lots of really good creative solutions come out of that, and also we have no budgets. We always work with like no money. I don't know whether that's true for you guys, but so you have to like bootstrap stuff together where you like to have a big AR thing and like an engine, and instead you're like, I got $15,000. So you have to use ingenuity, and you have to really be collective in your work in terms of technology and discipline and logistics, and like it's super collaborative, which is one of the reasons we really love it. And out of that, you have 10 great, amazing weirdos thinking together, and the orb shows up. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So Carolina, good versus gratuitous. How do you sort of know, where do you draw that line for like a truly meaningful interaction?
Well, I think the one test for it is whether it works or it doesn't work. You know, and I think the best things that work usually are the simplest, and those are the ones that we sort of take for granted. And so I think there's so many conventions that we have already built into the way we apprehend things that are in the storytelling and then in the narrative conventions or the dramatic conventions that are already used in all these different art forms that are out there. And it's simply, using that knowledge, using that's already out there. The suspension of disbelief, rather than, is much more powerful, right, than like showing the monster, its CG glory, right? Is suggestion is often much better. I don't know. That's a lot of, again, trial and error. A lot of sort of intuition too that goes into that.
You two guys want to weigh in?
I think for us, we just try to avoid letting the technology be the point. And that's something that, like again, in write-ups and stuff like that, when we're going back and forth about ideas, one of the things that we're aggressive about is don't talk about the enablement. You know, like we're working on this thing for Puma for World Cup, and the first 3 paragraphs of one of the concepts was about tech. It's about there's going to be mist and lights, and this is going to happen, and we're going to have a sensor that does that. And I was like, who cares about any of this shit? Like, what is the idea? And I think if you start with that magic moment, the card trick, then you back into the how. But I think anything that starts with the tech is generally going to be a shitty idea.